I think I said then during the meditation, what are we going to do with it? Now what? And it would be easy for the sense separation, the separate self, to think, okay, well, one of the first things we might do is go and become non-dual me, and create a role out of it and talk about it everywhere we go. And I think that's sort of an inevitable trap to some extent. But of course, the point of non-dual seeing is to see those traps very clearly, to think, wait a minute, I'm off again. When I think I'd finished Big Book Awakening by about 4 months when I first listened to Paul Hederman, and that's kind of what happened for me. At first when he said, "What's looking is what you're looking for," because it came down to that tiny reduced statement that, like I've said before, Billy just went pop, and as I said before, and I think this is the best way to say it. But it only makes sense if you understand this way of saying things. For the first time, nothing happened. For the first time ever, in like 52 years, nothing happened. It's just like, it was like the end. It did seem like the end of something. But the best way to say it would be that it was the end of things, and the first really clear sign of knowing nothing as an experience, no forms or shapes or labels. And that sort of began to unpack the BBA thing, because my experience of going through the steps early on was that I was so elated that I'd finished these things I'd seen on the wall, the traditions and the steps for so many years, that I felt good about finishing them and called that feeling good spiritual experience. But it was just feeling good. Self was satisfied that it had a new label and a new language. And of course, the first thing, when we get sober, is that we're just happy we're not using anymore. So, and I think that's really like my experience of early recovery. It was still all, definitely when I look back, it was all self. But it was just happier to be doing something else. So, listening to Paul Hederman a couple of years ago, and the first thing that happened was I realised that I was moving straight along the same path again with the Big Book Awakening thing, though I can't say enough about the Big Book Awakening model for the 12 steps. It gets right down in the pit of separation. And as I probably said to both of you before, I definitely know I've said it to Donald, as long as we're going through that piece of work, knowing that what we're really doing is not trying to create a better me, but unpacking the last attempt to create any kind of me, because I'm already there. I am the spiritual experience. You are the awakening, that thing? So that was good. And then, of course, there's been this interest in this expression of language. I think when we narrow it down, non-duality for me it's just a way of using words that points to, that's an expression of, in a particular kind of philosophical and psychological and emotional, it's kind of all of those things, but none of those things, points us to truth, like with a capital T, not my truth or your truth or his truth or her truth, but absolute truth, something that is true for everybody, which is why, it's the turning around, reducing down from ideas about me, reducing down the dialogue about me, just going all the way back down to see what remains. What's left when I take all the objects out of experience. Well, the first thing is obvious, is that experience itself is left. Just experiencing. And then, how do we know we're experiencing? Well, there's a knowing of experience, isn't there? And then, because the words are pointing the qualities of experience and the knowing of, we can then reduce even down from them and lose the words altogether and see what's left. And we end up with this awareness of the knowing of experience, being knowingly, experience itself. So we reduce everything right down to what is essential, and not essential as in it's essential, I must have it, I've got to have this thing, but what's essential to the experience of being me, what's always been there, what can I do without? So we can even do without words, can't we? We can do without people. All of the things, whether they're thoughts, beliefs, feelings, the learning of emotional dialogue, emotional intelligence, everything that we've gathered aren't essential because they're all changeable, because they're objects. What is left is just being, and being knowingly. So then what do we do with it? We become a fragrant offering of our true nature wherever we go. And we lose the desire because we lose the personality and the clamours to make sense of the person that I am, that I've been trying to perfect for all these years. We lose the tapes and the patterns that come with that. We lose the need to be driven by shame, or driven by fear, or led by shame and led by fear. Because we realise that those attachments, those addictions, and any attachment, any desire only exists in the person we were trying to perfect. They helped either medicate that sense of separation, they helped try and make sense of the movement of trying to get that right, to move towards an experience of being the best self I've ever been, or failing to be the best self I've ever been. I don't know if you know that feeling. That kind of worthiness. So there's all the toxic stuff that we start with and we end up entrenched in and overwhelmed by, don't we? Not only do substances overwhelm us and become our master, but the personality, the trying to perfect the personality, the most rapacious addiction that there is, overwhelms us. This is, as I said earlier, this is why working with people for years in mental health, when people say, I feel like giving up, or I've given up. And I always say to them, what does that mean? Not because I don't have ideas about what it means, but I wonder what it means for them. Generally, it seems to mean that they're giving up, putting energy into trying to perfect their latest plan. So maybe someone's, for example, sober, and it becomes so painful that they have to drink, and that's an inevitable consequence of not doing the inner work that addiction necessitates. As I heard the other day that someone I worked with a few years ago, been around AA for 20 years, and then I come along and start talking about the program. So 3 times I tried to get her through the program, because the inner work's never finally been completed. That inner transformation, that absence of self. So you can do the inner work and feel better about who you are as an independent person. And here we're going a stage further, aren't we? We're moving out of the person. We're recovering from self, not as self, and seeing that character and finding through self-inquiry that we can't actually locate who it is I think I am if we reduce down the labels, the medications, the stories, the trauma, all the stuff that's gone on in the past, the illusion of there being a future, and that I can, that I need hope, or that there's a will, and that all of that belongs to someone. That when I sit and without the use of words, I can't even find that person. So that person is an idea that I've been trying to perfect and pay attention to and invest in and work on for 52 years. The entirety of my story has been a spiritual experience, and it's every activity has gone towards bringing this moment to its fullness. Everything has, it's the same for all of us. And along the way, there's been a lot of falling into the dark night of the soul, falling into the pit, the collapse of the programs and plans for where I thought happiness was next going to occur. I tended, certainly in the first half of life, to think that was in relationships, because some of that was driven by the loss of my mother as a child, feminine energy and the seeking of that. So it's all gone into bringing us to this. Well, how can we express appreciation and gratitude? How can we say in an inspiring short soundbite what it means to have finally been given the gift of seeing through all of that, searching? I think Rupert Spira, I was listening to him earlier on, and he said, he asked us to look at all of that seeking and that work, and said, look, try and find out, have you ever got there? Have you ever finally got there? And I hadn't. There'd been periods, I think even with the recovery season, there was a period of, well, the first year was stark raving sober. The second year I did a little bit of work, which was just as well, because I probably didn't have long left based on, when I look back now, how mad I was and the ways in which I was acting out. But I did about 20 months, and within about a year and a half, that experience had worn off. I wasn't really using it anymore. I was just talking about, just as the people I was talking about earlier do, I was talking about experience that I'd had, not an experience I was still having. Ultimately, there was first getting sober from things, and then there was getting sober from being sober from things, And this is a sobriety of self, freedom from bondage of self, And not enough can be said about what that's like. And of course, what we do with that now is we be that expression of freedom. And although I'm not doing a great job here, it becomes much, much more the wisdom that we see in wise old folks and wise teachers when we meet them. They say amazing things in very few words. And I think when I hear the idea that, of being knowingly that light and being able to, wherever I am, very quickly notice that light that I am, that I've never not been, and to rest and abide as that there's a little bit of me, the thinker, the self, that feels like it doesn't feel like enough. It feels like, there must be more, like there should be some great purpose. Or now I've had this awakening, I must go out and help people. And I think we get some of that from the communities that we've belonged to and do belong to, don't we? Because that's a part of that community. You've got to give it away to keep it. Without the use of words, what is there to give away? And what is there to keep? There's nothing to hold on to, and there's nothing lost, is there? Because it's a relative term. But it does point to very well the idea of servant-heartedness. How can I be an offering? And until we embody that sense of true self, whole self, beingness, that in the end love, our divine nature that we already are, without the use of words, anything we give away is cheap and tacky. Really, it's nice, but will it have the power to transform? I'm sure it'll have an impact. Everything we give is an offering. But to give light is to give light. What else is there? And again, it doesn't feel like it's saying much. So that might be a clue that counterintuitively, the fact that it seems inadequate means that it's absolutely accurate.